Mario Tennis Fever has been out for barely a week, and I have an admission. I am obsessed. Each time I get to the end of a match, I can't help but queue up another. The core Mario Tennis gameplay here is just endlessly replayable, and it's pretty much all thanks to the brand new Fever Rackets. With 31 rackets to choose from, these are the perfect jolt of arcadey Mario weirdness that this game and the entire Mario Sports series kind of needed. In between making videos, I've battled my way through ranked online and played a bunch of matches against my friends, so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on which rackets are great and which are buns, so why not rank them all? This list is by no means definitive, and more so just for fun. With somewhat competitive games like this one, the meta can switch up on a dime, especially with potential future balance updates. On top of that, each racket's competitive viability can change in an instant depending on which character you pick, and if you're in doubles, what racket your partner has. Because of all those factors, this is less so an objective pro gamer perspective ranking and more so just for the fun of it. Nearly every racket is viable in this game. Nearly. So this is just a general ranking based on how fun they are, interesting and useful their mechanic is, and overall effectiveness for each racket. But enough yapping, this is the ranking of all 31 Fever Rackets in Mario Tennis Fever. As I said in the beginning, almost every racket is viable. Almost. However, there is one racket that's even worse than the personal racket, which is just a normal tennis racket with no actual effect. That's right, there's a racket that actively nerfs you in my opinion, and that racket is the Charge and Chuck racket. This turns the ball into a football that can bounce unpredictably. Easily the worst racket in the entire game, because not only does the effect of turning the ball into a bouncing football not help you at all, again, it actually does more harm than good. Just for context, there's two different types of Fever Rackets in this game. There's buff effects that trigger the second you use them, and then on bounce effects that only trigger when the ball actually lands on the ground. The Charge and Chuck racket is our first buff racket, but to me, I'd rather call it a debuff or a nerf racket. More times than I can count, when using this, it actually saves the ball for my opponent rather than tripping them up. Take this clip for example. Dry Bowser sets me up for the perfect spike. With literally every other racket, this would land right in the middle, either give me a buff or set off an effect, and more importantly, the Fever shot itself would probably be too fast for Dry Bowser to hit. Only when I use the Charge and Chuck racket would it actually halt all momentum, giving him plenty of time to walk over and just hit it back. I guess it would help you recover the ball too by giving it extra airtime, but that just leads to rallies that never end. This is a boring racket with a horrible Fever effect. You're literally better off with the non-Fever effect racket. Speaking of, this is just the base racket. You can still use Fever shots, but it has no additional extra effect. I honestly don't get why this is an option in the first place, but it is funny that it wasn't last place somehow. Come on, the Charge and Chuck racket needs like either a buff or a complete rework, or else it's just kind of destined to be the worst racket in this game until the heat death of the universe. Coming in at number 29, we have the Boomerang racket, and if you haven't heard of this racket before, it's because it's only available in swing mode, the motion controlled mode of this game. On top of the entire swing mode itself just being kind of janky with stiff feeling motion controls, the racket controls just as weird. It creates a gust of wind that circles you and will auto return the ball when hit, but besides that small bit of RNG that may throw off an opponent, you're better off just choosing where to hit with a specific shot. Moving forward, although I do have my favorites and think some rackets are clearly worse than others, I really do believe every racket we talk about from now on is viable, be it in casual or online. To get footage for this video, I played a bunch of online and tried every racket one after another, and out of my 30 games with 30 different rackets, I won 26 of them. This is an A rank too, I'm telling you, unless you get to the top 100 of the world, if you like a certain racket, you can stick with it and it will work. There are some I think are better than others, but the difference is relatively minuscule, and if you're good with a racket that I rank lower from this point on, don't switch off of it just because of my ranking, because you can still cook people online with everything I'm about to talk about. All that to say, the Typhoon racket is, in my opinion, the least good of the viable rackets. It spawns in a moving tornado on the opponent's side, which will occasionally redirect the ball if it hits it, but I feel like the hitbox of the tornado itself is way smaller than it looks. Getting hit by this thing feels like it should spin you around or push you to another side of the court, but it's more of a small breeze than anything. You can get a few good hits if you play the ball around it, but out of all the on-bounce effect rackets, there's much better Fever effects than the Typhoon. At number 27, we have one of the most interesting rackets in this entire game, that being the Question Mark racket. This one gives you a random Fever effect every time you use it, and this seems like a cool racket in theory, and if it could be any effect, then why isn't it dead center in the middle of the ranking? Well, that's because even though your opponent may not know what the effect is, neither do you. Although I'm ranking these broadly, the character you choose, as I said in the intro, matters just as much as your Fever Racket, and having their strengths synergized together is extremely important. This is why you see like a million of Rosalina using the Swerve Racket, or Donkey Kong's using the Metal Racket. With this question mark racket, you can't plan around a playstyle until you use the Fever Shot. That's not to mention, to properly utilize this racket, you kinda need to know how to play around every other Fever Shot, and if you're good enough online to know every racket, I'm assuming your opponent is too. This then just puts you at a blatant disadvantage compared to your opponent's known character racket combo. This is a fun idea and I'm glad it's in the game, but it's not useful or good in the slightest. Coming in at number 26, we have the Inky Racket, and you can really tell this isn't a pro player's perspective because the Inky Racket isn't bad per se, it's just super freaking annoying. As you probably expect, the Inky Racket covers your entire screen with ink. I don't get Nintendo's obsession with splattering ink all over my screen in their games, but it sure is annoying, and anytime I see someone using this racket, I audibly groan. Unlike the Mud Racket, which is pretty similar and I actually like, the Ink Racket doesn't just end once you hit your opponent's side of the net. Instead, the ball stays inky for a good long while, inking both sides and splattering your own screen as well. Unless you're super confident in your volley abilities and don't mind not seeing your entire screen, this is basically a mutually assured destruction racket. Both sides of the court will be covered, both screens will be inky, and no one will be having fun. For the best of the best players, this may end up being one of the greatest rackets in the game, but I personally just have no fun using the Thwomp Racket. All this does is place down a hovering thwomp. I actually do enjoy most effects that award you playing around a hazard, but when it comes to the thwomp, he hardly drops down at all and feels much more like a stage hazard than something helping you specifically. The Shadow Racket is one of the first rackets I thought was really good and even busted until I played the game for just a little bit longer. You see a lot of people choose this racket, especially newer players, and although having a shadow teammate covering you seems broken, especially in singles, which makes it a 2v1, it's not that good, mainly because the shadow character you get is absolute buns. I don't know what CPU difficulty the shadow is set for, but it doesn't charge shots and usually hits it so bad that it's basically a free pass to get spiked on by your opponent. Whenever I'm facing someone with the Shadow Racket, I just end up hitting the ball over and over to the shadow until it goes away. Additionally, there are some times where your shadow CPU probably should return a ball and just randomly decides to take a nap and doesn't. After that happens one or two times to you while you're using this racket, you stop actually trusting the shadow CPU. Because of that, while a 2v1 seems disgusting, it's really more like a 1v1 because you can't actually trust your shadow buddy, and then when he does hit it, most of the time it's not even a good hit. Placing the Pokey Racket at number 23 in this list is proof for just how many good Fever Rackets there are in this game. This racket is by no means bad. In fact, I'd say it's actually pretty fun. It's one of my favorite well-designed rackets in the game because it has multiple different stages. Wherever the ball lands on the court, a pokey will pop out. The initial pokey is one of the smaller obstacles in this game in terms of actually taking up space on the court, but because it's pretty tall, its main use is to actually just block the screen. No matter if it lands on your side or the other side, it can cover up a decent amount of the court just visually. When the pokey is ran into by a player or hit by a ball, it splits out into a bunch of different smaller spiky things. These pieces of its body just kind of sit around the court and act as their own version of hazards. Again, it can be useful to play around this, but it's basically just the spiny racket, only at least the spinies actually hone in on your opponent. The two phases of this racket feel like a really small, not really consequential obstacle that blocks more of your screen than anything, and then once the pokey breaks apart, it just feels like a worse version of plenty of other Fever effects. With so many better hazard effects, I just couldn't put the Pokey Racket too much higher on the list. Just like with the Shadow Racket, the Bullet Bill Racket is by far the most common Fever Racket I saw when starting up online, and even in early impressions for the game, everyone was talking about how broken and overpowered it was. Yeah, at first glance, how would turning the ball into a bullet bill that zooms by too fast to react not be the most busted racket in the game? Well, it is pretty good until you realize just how predictable it is. The Bullet Bill launches with a tiny bit of startup, and they always go straight forward. That means no lobs or no curves. It's also super restricted on how much of an angle it can actually be aimed, so I'll let you in on a little secret here. No matter what, when someone uses the Bullet Bill Racket, just play at the very front of the net. Unless it body shots you, you can kind of return it every single time without fail by just pressing the hit button as soon as it starts launching. That essentially turns this racket useless. It's really good against people who don't know how to play the game, but once you even get a little bit higher up on the ranked ladder, it's pretty easy to counter every time. At number 21, we have the Flame Racket, which leaves one big chunk of fire in the middle with 4 smaller chunks surrounding it. This is the most basic hazard racket, and is a good one to start with, but because it's pretty basic, it is easy to maneuver around after you get used to it. It's a bit like the Pokey with its spread out hazards, but if you hit the flames, your character will pull a Mario 64 and just start running around. This should mess up most players and make them miss shots, but you can still swing while you're in this running state, and there's even been a few times where it's actually helped me save a shot getting to it faster rather than making me fail. The Lava Racket spits up a fireball that lands in random spots on the court. This one is pretty good to keep pressure up on your opponent, but the shadow before the fireball lands makes this a pretty easy racket to read. It will definitely help you get a point or two, but it's nothing too crazy beyond that. The Freezing Racket is pretty much the exact same thing as the Flame Racket, except it only freezes instead of burns. Overall, the freezing effects in this game are much better than the fire effects, because you can still swing around when you're burned, but from my experience, you have a much better chance of getting the ball past them if they freeze even for a moment. The Banana Racket is so goofy. This is probably my favorite looking Fever Racket in the game. If you know me, you know I love Donkey Kong, and the Banana Racket fits perfectly with that big ape. Unfortunately, much like the Inky Racket, it keeps its effect even after you land the initial shot, so if your opponent returns it, you'll also get bananas on your side of the court. Even with that risk, it's still a very fun racket to use, and as long as you can position well, you can stack their court up with tons of bananas and keep your court relatively clean. The Mud Racket at number 17 fills a good portion of the opponent's court with slow-moving mud. Not only does this massively slow down the player and the ball, but it also damages them as they sit in it, which can be really annoying even if they do happen to hit back every shot. This is one of my favorite area of effects because it might not be the best one, but it's a ton of fun to use and play around. This being one of the first rackets unlocked teaches you how to play around fever effects. You can either hit it into the mud to slow down the shot, or psych them out and hit them in the clear to throw them off. Any effect that lets me use these like rock, paper, scissors-esque mind games is a ton of fun, and although the Mud Racket is simple, it's still one I love to use. There's a similar deal here with the Ice Racket, only this one is ice, if you could have guessed. It makes your opponent slip around, so although you don't have to aim the ball into the area of effect like the mud, you can force your opponent on one side, then hit it to the other side on your next swing, making it pretty unlikely they'll be able to get all the way there with the ice on the court. Also, standing on ice does deplete your HP, which I feel like a lot of people probably realize but don't like fully internalize because it's kind of weird, but that's a small little buff to this racket that I feel like most people online, they probably do know, but they don't like fully comprehend and, use that within their play session. At number 15, we have the Swerve Racket. This is a racket that adds extra curve to your shots to throw your opponents off. To be honest, it's kind of mid with a lot of characters, but on tricky characters, this thing is absolutely disgusting. Especially with Rosalina and her super high base lobs. If you add in the Swerve Racket there, you'll give your opponents whiplash. I do think it's pretty easily readable after a while, especially if you learn your opponent's playstyle, so this one does lose a bit of its usefulness after the initial shock and awe wears off, but it's still flashy, fun to use, and can throw your opponents off, specifically if you're also using a tricky character or are able to vary up your shots. Number 14 is like the Typhoon Racket on steroids. This is the Tornado Racket. Instead of just one big tornado sitting on the opponent's court, mini tornadoes instead shoot out wherever you hit the ball, and although these are smaller, it really doesn't matter at all because this is so much more useful than the Typhoon Racket. I feel like these projectile effects are much more versatile and useful than the area of effects because not only do multiple come out, but if you train your opponent to hit certain parts of the court, you can line up the tornadoes and block them from the ball or kind of pinch them into a certain area, giving you an easy spike. The Mini Mushroom Racket has some of the most potential out of this entire video. This may end up being one of the super slept on good rackets after a few weeks, but at least as of right now, whenever I use the Mini Mushroom Racket, I just don't think it's that good. As you'd expect, it lays out mini mushrooms, and if your opponent hits this, they turn really small. When they are small, it does make it easier to hit around your opponents as they dive shorter and run slower, but it doesn't last that long and nothing's stopping them from just running into all 4 mushrooms to get it over with right away. This is definitely not bad, but I don't have a ton of fun using it, and it also doesn't feel good enough to sacrifice that fun factor. I could totally see this racket becoming very strong later on though, because turning your opponent small can help you win multiple rallies in a row. The Lightning Racket spawns in an area of effect that shocks one specific spot over and over again in intervals. I feel like players constantly underestimate this one. Because it doesn't constantly shock, I like to train my opponents to run through them, making them think they have it figured out. Then I hit it just right to get them shocked, granting me me a free point. This one takes a bit more finesse than some others, but it's so much fun to strategize with and lasts a good long while. Number 11 is one of the hardest rackets to rank in this entire video. That is the Star Racket. Like you would expect if you've played pretty much any Mario game, the Star Racket turns you invincible with extra speed. Here's the problem. Turning invincible can be useful or useless depending on what Fever Racket you're facing. If they have a buff racket or something that doesn't spawn stuff on your side of the court, then this is borderline a waste. The extra speed is nice, but the speed stat doesn't seem as useful as curve or power, so the Star Racket is just generally not as good when compared to other rackets. It also doesn't even protect you from the Inky Racket. Like, what? That kind of surprised me. I thought it should. It is still nice to be able to just choose to go invincible though, especially in doubles if you're going up against two people with the effect rackets and there's just a ton of stuff on your side of the court. This one can be like a free get out of jail free card. Kicking off the top 10, we have the Fire Flower Racket. This thing throws out fireballs every single time you hit the ball. This is one of the simplest effects in the game, but it's one of the best if you use it right. This racket is already good due to the randomness of where the fireballs go, but if you use a character that excels in rallies, it doesn't matter how good your opponent is when it comes to the sheer amount of fireballs that are being thrown out onto the court. This one is a ton of fun, and although it's simple, it's extremely effective. Number 9 is the Ghost Racket. Obviously, this one turns you invisible, as well as the tennis ball after it goes over the net. This is one of those rackets you'll play against, and if you lose, you'll feel like it was impossible to win. And although it may get newer players, after you play a few matches and know how each shot and character works, you should be able to read the ball fairly well. On top of the swing lock-on being pretty generous, this just isn't too hard to read and counter. However, for some characters with spin or high lobs, this can be quite the tricky racket to deal with. Number 8 is the Spiny Racket, and this is basically the Poke Racket, but way better. Instead of unmoving hazards, the Spinies will track down the player. They don't put you out of commission for too long, but you'll usually get hit, and then because the other Spinies are still trying to hunt you down, you'll get hit by another one again and again and again. If you're able to keep the volley going, even more Spinies will come out. And with all of these things chasing your opponent, it's really only a matter of time before they mess up. This one is simple, but super fun to play around. With the Spinies always moving, it lets you be a little more dynamic and switch things up if you can't quite trick your opponent up right off the bat. Number 7 is the Ice Flower Racket, and this is basically the Fire Flower Racket but better, because remember, I think ice effects are actually better than the fire effects in this game. Although it is rare, sometimes the fire can help get your opponent to the ball faster, so the Ice Flower just freezing them temporarily is only a plus. Again, just like the Fire Flower Racket, if you pick a character that excels in rallies, you can shoot off like 10 ice balls in like a few seconds. Obviously very, very powerful. Coming in at number 6, we have the Shover Racket, and just like the Bullet Bill Racket, when I first used the Shova, I thought I finally found the game-breaking combo. Shoving your opponents all the way back to the edge of their court and then just using a drop shot is so much fun, and I really did think it might be the best combo in the game. The only issue is, the Shova is kind of a one-trick pony. To get any use out of this thing, you just have to spam shoves and then drop shot, hoping your opponent can't get all the way up to where the ball drops and rinse and repeat. Not only does this get repetitive and slightly boring, but your opponent will catch on extremely quickly. Either they'll just lob the ball to buy time, or use a fever shot and beat you to the punch. Either way, the Shover Racket is still useful, especially against slower characters. But with anyone else, although you can get some value through positioning, I think you're better off with the rest of the rackets on this list. It's still very fun though, and super satisfying to shove your opponents way back. The Firebar Racket is the most simple yet most effective area of effect fever effect. It spawns in a giant firebar that spins. You don't want to touch it, that's all I can tell you. This one is so basic, yet so fun to play around. Not only is it a hazard that your opponent obviously needs to focus on avoiding, but you can time your shots just right to make your opponent get hit by the fire as it just spins to the right spot. Again, this is not the most fancy or flashiest fever effect out there, but it makes up for it with a huge area of effect and super long lasting time. If you place this in the middle of the court and play around it correctly, you get like 4 free points every time you use it. I mean, it's a rotating firebar in a Mario game where you can't jump. Obviously, that thing's gonna be pretty powerful, especially if you're able to time your shots up to land right when the firebar would hit your opponent. The Metal Racket is like the Star, but much more useful. It also turns you invincible, but instead of extra speed, you get extra power. Now, I don't know about anyone else in this game, but power seems to be the best stat, at least from what I've seen, and pairing the Metal Racket with a character like Donkey Kong feels absolutely busted. Not only can you just negate all your opponent's offensive effects, but you can send the ball absolutely flying. All the power you get makes this a ton of fun fun to use. It's one of the best like sheer fun enjoyment rackets in the entire game. Even beyond that, the invincibility makes it incredibly useful. This is an all-around really good racket, but when paired with a character again like Donkey Kong, it makes it one of the best. Coming in at number 3, the bronze place is actually the Golden Dash Racket. This dashes you to the ball when you otherwise would have probably missed it. This is yet another, oh, that seems broken racket, only this time it kinda actually is. Every other quote-unquote broken racket like the Bullet Bill or Shadow usually have a catch or a weakness you can pretty easily exploit, but the Golden Dash Racket is just kinda really good. If you charge a shot away from the ball, or take damage as the ball bounces for a second time, it won't work, so it's not foolproof, but there's a reason this is by far the most used racket online. Even higher up in like A and S rank, I see it easily the most. It looks flashy, saves you from losing a point, and can't be used against you, so I think it is one of the best. The only reason it's not even higher up is I just don't have that much fun with it. And with the final couple of rackets, you can still score on people even if they're using the Golden Dash if you know what you're doing. This thing is still very powerful though. Being able to zoom around the court is kind of a twofold effect. Not only is it obviously very strong, but also it's gotta just be doing damage to your opponent's mental, because they can hit a perfectly placed shot and oh, you're over there already. Number 2 is the Magic Racket, and this thing does so much that I fully expect it to get nerfed in a future update. Upon impact, it puts down a Kamek wand that shoots a beam at your opponent. When hit, they get mini stunned, lose health, and their racket turns into a frying pan. On top of just being funny, the frying pan takes away their fever shot and makes it so they can only hit flats. This almost has too much utility, because you can either wait for them to get stunned in order to get the ball past them, bank on them to hit a flat towards you, or hit a risky shot, knowing they can't save it with a fever shot of their own. On top of all that, this thing lasts for basically the amount of time it takes your fever gauge to fill up again. And you can even have 2 of these things on the court at once. It's a ton of fun to use, puts a lot of pressure on your opponent, and is one of the funnier rackets in the whole game. Just be sure that they don't volley it back to your side, because then everything I just said goes against you. So we've gone through 30 rackets already. However, the 31st and final racket, which you already know if you've been paying attention, is by far my favorite. Not just because it's powerful, not just because it's fun to use, but because in my opinion, it has easily the highest skill ceiling in the game. That is the Amp Racket. This turns your shots into electrical amps that connect together, forming electrical lines. With up to 3 amps per side of the court, you can make more than half the court just purely inaccessible. As I said, this is easily the racket with the highest skill ceiling, as it rewards precise aiming and planning out where you're gonna place these things. Although I personally may not be using it to its absolute fullest potential, it's still so much fun to set up, and when you get the perfect triangle, you can make it literally impossible for your opponent to reach the ball. You do have to make sure they can't return it onto your side though, because this thing can be easily used against you, but again, this is probably the most skill demanding racket in the game, so that's just the price you're gonna have to pay for being able to turn like the majority of their court into electrical warfare. The Amp Racket takes everything fun about Fever Rackets and amps it up to 11. This thing's super fun, easy to use, but kind of difficult to master, and when in the right hands, can be the most powerful thing in the game. The Amp Racket is my personal favorite Fever Racket in Mario Tennis Fever, at least as of right now. Hopefully they add more Fever Rackets though to this game at some point. I feel like most Mario sports games end up getting free updates now, and this game doesn't need additional Fever Rackets, but I definitely appreciate it, because these are by far my favorite part of this whole game. They make Mario Tennis Fever have a bit more of that Mario Party-esque quality to it, where crazy stuff can happen and you just gotta go, oh, okay, I personally love that, so I love Fever Rackets. Let me know what you think down in the comments below though. Do you agree with any of this ranking? Do you disagree with any of this ranking? It's impossible to purely rank these based on like competitive skill, again, because it really matters what character you pair with it, and also in doubles what other racket your partner's using. I think that goes to show how well balanced these are, that they're very matchup dependent. But that's just me. Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. If you want to see our video going over the good, the bad, the ugly of this game, it's on screen right now. I'm Thomas from The Switched Up, signing off. Peace.